If you enjoy podcasts like this, you should check out our other shows on Health Podcast Network. For example, Hopeful Hints, hosted by Dr. Tara, guides and supports those on the often challenging and isolating journey of women's health concerns and infertility. There's a particularly powerful episode that you should check out called All Things Endometriosis, which dives deep into understanding the condition to help the many women who suffer from endometriosis and have no idea they have it, and healthcare providers who are uneducated about it, making the diagnosis process so difficult. Check out Hopeful Hints on your favorite podcast platform or visit healthpodcastnetwork.com.
Have you been thinking about transitioning into a non-clinical leadership role? Maybe this line of thinking always ends up with you feeling overwhelmed or confused or even frustrated because you're not sure which path to take. You're not sure which role is right for you. Well, you have to decide. Is it going to be the path of staying on the hamster wheel of decision-making? Or are you going to finally take the first step to securing your future with the next best role? Well, I'm here to help you with my 90-day transition plan. To learn more, schedule your career transition breakthrough call at www.schedulewithdrlisa.com. That's www.schedulewithdrlisa.com. Hey there, leading ladies. Welcome to the Women Physicians Lead podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Lisa Herbert, a two-time best-selling author, speaker, family physician, and executive leadership coach with over 20 years experience of providing primary care and serving as a healthcare leader. If you are a woman physician ready to make a change in your career and have a seat at the leadership table, then you are in the right place. I'm excited to provide you with the crucial skills you need to be a successful leader and strategies to deal with workplace challenges. So put on your headphones and listen as we explore the new world of building women physician leaders. Hello, welcome to another episode of the Women Physicians Lead podcast. I am your host, Dr. Lisa. And I'm excited today to bring you another guest. I'm really excited today to talk to Dr. Alexandra Howson because she has such an interesting background in health education, also in career transition, which is what we've been talking a lot about on the podcast. We've also been talking about career reinvention, so that's even something that I'm interested to talk to her about, as well as just being a woman in leadership. So I'm excited today, again, to bring to you Dr. Alexandra Howson. She is a CME CE writer and educator who teaches best practices in continuing education content for health professionals. She was a trauma OR nurse for several years before working as faculty at the Universities of Edinburgh and Aberdeen. She has published several articles in peer-reviewed journals on the qualitative factors driving the effectiveness of educational interventions and teaches medical writing ethics in the professional certificate program at the University of Chicago. Alexandra is the host of Write Medicine, which is kind of where we connected through podcasting. So it's a weekly podcast exploring best practices in creating continuing education content for health professionals. So welcome to the podcast.
Oh, it's great to be here, Lisa.
Great. So I was really looking forward to this conversation, this interview that we're going to have today, because even in my own background, I sort of came into the interest of writing. And I think a lot of health professionals may have that interest in writing. So I'm really interested to learn about your background. So if you can just tell us a little bit about your career and leadership journey and who or what may have inspired you to go from being an OR nurse. You can tell us about that journey and then now becoming a CME CE writer.
Yeah, that's a long journey for sure. As you noted, I started my professional journey pretty much straight out of school as a nurse in training back in the 1980s in Scotland. And at that time, we trained in colleges. And so we had time in the clinical setting and time in college and kind of went back and forward. It's very different now. And of course, Scottish education system is very different from the US as well. I would say that from there, I kind of transitioned into, I became a trauma OR nurse, as you mentioned. I was a senior staff nurse for a few years before heading off to academia. And that's when I actually went to university, did an undergraduate degree, did a PhD, and so on. And I'll get to how I got into CME, but your question about who or what might have been instrumental in my journey, I would say that, when I started nursing training, I was 18 years old. And it's pretty young to be sort of thrown into clinical settings very quickly. You are seeing the rough side of life, and you are in the thick of the health and healing that you need to do as a clinical professional. And one of the things that helped me there, and I think has really stayed with me in terms of that leadership journey, is our first clinical teacher, a woman called Margaret Collingwood. She was a very tall, imposing woman who had been in the military and really didn't take nonsense from anyone. She was resolute in her determination that to make nurses of us who were capable, determined, and unafraid to lead the way. And, I trained in nursing at a time when nursing was still seen as a little bit subservient to medicine. And one of the lessons that she was trying to teach us was that you have to stand up to authority when you believe that you are right and you are able to substantiate what you kind of feel and believe. And I think that approach to practice, to learning, has actually stayed with me over the years, that you have to kind of draw a stake in the ground, draw a line in the ground and be clear about what you believe, who you are, and what informs that belief.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And to also circle back to your question about, how I found CME, like many writers, I stumbled across this area. I think unless you are a clinician, you're not really aware that continuing education and continuing medical education exists. I found it because I had left academia and I was looking for work that, where I could use my existing skills without having to retrain. So this is kind of 20 years ago. And those skills at the time were, I had trained as a qualitative researcher. I was a writer. I had written books and articles. And I was a teacher. I'd been working in academia. And my search for work that would use those skills actually led me to the American Medical Writers Association. It has a ton of resources on its website. It did 20 years ago. It has even more now. And through AMWA, I actually found continuing medical education through one of the workshops they offered by someone who's become a dear friend, Dr. Eve Wilson. And at that point, I realized continuing medical education is a sweet spot for anyone who is a lifelong learner, a problem solver, and an information synthesizer. And so I put down my roots, and that's where I've been for the last 20 years.
Yeah. And that's interesting. I'm glad that you shared that journey, because I think for a lot of us who might be looking at, right, a career transition, a lot of times we forget about the skills that we have and how to use them, right? So it becomes important for people like you and me and, other mentors to help us to figure out what those skills are that we have and the experience that we have, right, that we can take and use and sort of reinvent, for lack of a better word, ourselves and develop that sort of career that we're really passionate about and that we, eventually can sort of transition to if we want to at some point.
Oh, I agree 100%. I think one of the things I see in professionals who are kind of moving out of clinical work or academia or research work and finding their way into medical writing in general is exactly that process. It's almost as though as soon as you step outside your current professional identity, you forget that you have all these layers of expertise kind of stacked up over the years. And one of the first exercises I do with people is try to help them to review their current skills in the widest possible way, because people are always surprised at their depth and breadth. And that's a great place to start from once you have that sort of inventory.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think taking that inventory is so important. It's one of the things, again, that I sort of recommend as well is to take stock of what you've accomplished, right? All of your wins. We forget to sometimes, kind of keep a record of those things. And even when we're going like for promotions and things like that, we totally forget about all the things that we've accomplished, that will help make that process easier. So, yeah. So thank you for sharing that. And so I want to start talking a little bit about your actual job today, like your career, sort of what you do, who do you serve, what challenges do you face, if any, but what does the day in the life of, a CME, CE, writer, and instructor, teacher, coach, what does that look like?
Well, at the moment, a typical day, is probably a little different than it was even a couple of years ago. I mostly focus on teaching medical writers how to specialize in CME content. So I run a professional development membership. I teach courses and I coach writers. And I also host the podcast, as you know. So I work from home and I've done that for 20 years. So my day is very cocooned in my colorful office, which is painted various shades of orange if you're listening rather than watching. And so a typical day kind of involves responding to questions from people in my membership and trying to respond to them in a way that will give them the practical tips and resources that they need to, pick themselves up and get back in the game if they've encountered something that's made them stumble or stall. I also, a typical day will involve running some kind of online teaching or coaching session, whether that's for my own courses or for the University of Chicago. So I do a lot of online face-to-face work with people. And then, the other part is creating resources to share with members, as well as the writers that I want to engage with so that they can learn about what I do and how I can help them. On the writing side of things, a typical day would look like perhaps a kickoff call with an education provider client to learn about, a new project that's kicking off, get all the kind of parameters and all my ducks in a row for that project. Scheduling when to talk to faculty as the subject matter experts to support that project. Beginning the research process, which can be pretty extensive, even for short CME activities, because as you know, everything has to be evidence-based and clinically accurate, and then beginning to sort of draft out and write that content. So my days always involve a lot of writing, and I'm very cognizant about, things like ergonomics and taking breaks to avoid repetitive strain injury and eye injury and all of those kinds of things. And I start my day pretty early. I think I'm probably not alone, especially among your listeners. I have a fairly consistent routine of movement and meditation and journaling. We'll probably talk about that in a few minutes. But I try to keep a kind of consistent routine, even though I work mainly solo and work from home. I think you mentioned challenges.
Yeah.
And I think, one of the key challenges when you're running your own business is generating consistent revenue. So part of my day, always involves reviewing sort of progress toward my overall goals and trying to fine tune my marketing to make sure that I'm finding and engaging with the right people, people who are ready to specialize in CME and that I'm delivering what they need. I'm also always trying to collect testimonials. I have a process for doing that. And then using all of these insights to fine tune my offers. So there's a lot of different things going on in any one typical day, but every day involves writing. Every day involves engaging with someone online. And every day involves some kind of review and refinement.
Great. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's important for those who are looking maybe to transition into, say, a remote career or transition into a career that may take them out of clinical practice, sort of what that looks like, and to understand that there's still a process. There are still habits that you have to form, and there's still tasks that you have to complete, margins that you have to look at. goals that you have to meet. So it's really important, yeah, for us to, still understand that that's still part of the process as well.
It definitely is.
Yeah. So if I'm a listener or if I'm, watching this episode, what information would you give me if I was thinking about maybe transitioning into becoming a medical writer or specifically even like a CME writer? What advice would you give us?
Well, I think the first thing is, and we kind of touched on this a few moments ago, is to review your current skills, to take stock, whether you're using some kind, I mean, you can do that in a fairly open-ended way. And there are also lots of tools and resources out there. And I'm sure that you have tools that you share with your clients as well. So just kind of taking stock of your current skills, particularly if you have written what your writing is like. So if you have written things, and if you're a clinician, yes, you're going to have written something, then catalog the types of writing that you've done. Case reports, patient notes. Perhaps you've been an author or co-author on academic peer-reviewed articles. So whatever it is, kind of catalog what you've written and the types of audiences that you've written for. Perhaps you've been involved in writing some patient education pieces, but you haven't really seen that as writing. Wow. Yes, everything that you've written, start cataloging that. If you haven't written or you're feeling as though what you've written doesn't count in some sort of way, then start writing. You could write a blog for yourself. You could write a case report. You can write something that isn't a terribly heavy lift, just so that you can get into the habit of writing. And also think about your research skills. When you're looking for information, where are you going for that information? Making sure that it's, it's evidence-based, it's peer-reviewed, all those sorts of things. Because research and writing go hand in hand for medical writers and CME writers. So having some clarity over where you sit in relation to those skills is important. And once you've appraised them, if you feel that you need to refresh or brush up, there are resources out there that will help you move forward. The American Medical Writers Association is a great place to find some of those resources. I think the second thing I would suggest is to also take inventory of your clinical expertise. If you are a clinician, then working as a writer isn't the only way to work in CME. You can work as a clinical or scientific director. You'll probably still be doing some writing, but as a scientific director, you have more control over shaping the direction of education content. You could work as a peer reviewer. You can work as a subject matter expert. So there are different roles for clinicians or people with clinical expertise in CME. So, take a little bit of stock of the clinical areas where you can really demonstrate and share your clinical expertise. I think the next thing to do is to connect with anyone who might have a tenuous link to CME. Anyone who works in a CME department. Your alma mater will likely have a CME department. It might be really small. In the academic setting, one of the things that is true of CME is that although they're often small but mighty, they do a lot of work, but often with one or two people who are wearing a lot of different hats. Connect with those people to have a conversation about what they do, the types of work that they do, and how you might help them, even on a voluntary basis to begin with, just to kind of get a sense of, what that looks like. If you're a member of a medical specialty society, American College of Cardiology, American College of Rheumatology, whatever, they will have CME departments. Perhaps there's somebody you can get in touch with there just to start that conversation about what they do. And if you do CME, then start looking more critically at the types of activities that are out there. Some are better than others, for sure. Mm-hmm. But you can start to kind of build up a sense of what looks like quality to you. What are you looking for when you're looking for CME? Yeah. And that will give you a good foundation for thinking about the types of clients that you might actually want to work with as a writer or as a scientific director. And then one more thing you can do, you can download my Write CME roadmap, which kind of gives you an overview of the field and provides a lot of information about where writers fit in and the type of work that they do in CME. So I think there's a lot of steps that you can take to sort of prepare yourself and just gently explore whether CME is something that might have a place for you.
Sure, definitely. Yeah, thank you for that information. You even opened up my eyes to all the different possibilities within CME writing, because as you mentioned, it doesn't necessarily just have to be the writing. Could be
Absolutely.
all of those other things as well. And I will definitely share the roadmap, or we'll get back to that at the end of the episode. I would like for you to share where they can go and actually, download that roadmap, because I think that would be very helpful to the listeners as well.
Absolutely.
One of the things I wanted to talk about, which I think is pretty prevalent in the healthcare industry and among healthcare professionals, obviously is burnout. And that sometimes, leads us, fortunately and unfortunately, to sometimes transition, right, out of clinical medicine. And I know that you mentioned on your website that you obviously were a nurse for 20 years and you left being a nurse and academic because of burnout, and sort of just found your way into this nice, new niche that you have now. So now that you're kind of on the other side of that, thriving and doing very well, what would you, how would you define self-care? And what are some of the things that you do now to really take care of yourself to make sure that you don't sort of end up in that, syndrome of burnout again?
Yeah. And I agree. I think one of the things that I'm still seeing is the people from healthcare, academia, research, and so on who end up in my world, as it were, are they're being driven out.
Yeah.
They are recognizing that this sense of fatigue and exhaustion and frustration. So and obviously the pandemic has exacerbated that for a
Sure.
lot of people. And there's a gender issue here as well, I think, in the sense that it's often women who having this experience. I will say that working for or one of the challenges when you run your own business is that it's easy to work constantly, especially if you enjoy it. And
Yeah.
especially in those early days, which are a little bit heady. You're excited about what the future holds. It's different from what you've been doing. But pretty quickly, we talked about goals and revenue and margins and so on. Pretty quickly, that financial reality kind of set in, and you have to figure out how you're going to keep the ball rolling. So it's very easy to work constantly. And I would say that over time and experience and the peri to post menopause journey has really taught me to listen more closely to my body and what my body is telling me.
Mm-hmm.
So the self-care piece is always a work in progress. I never kind of feel as though I have that down, because although I have a routine and I have practices that I do to support my self-care, I definitely still have those moments where you're kind of tipping back into, okay, I've got deadlines. I've been sick. Now I need to catch up, or sometimes your workload is you have to bring additional support in and that kind of thing. But I do try and prioritize rest and relaxation. I'm very influenced and inspired by Trisha Hersey's work, Rest is Resistance, and the NAP Ministry, and using that as a way to not be recaptured by what she calls grind hustle.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
And so trying to kind of keep that front and center so that, yeah, work is important and meaningful and interesting and enjoyable, but I also need to really honor my own body's energy and capacity. So sleep is important. I'm an early riser, but I'm in bed by 8:30 pretty much every night. Sleep is important. Doing things that, right? Yes, absolutely. I get into bed, I read, I'm asleep by 9. Doing things that nourish me.
Yeah.
Over the years, you learn what nourishes you and helps you feel supported. And I do think that's what self-care is, finding the things that support your energy and your focus. So for me, that's things like walking my dog and gardening and reading and knitting and, different things like that. So these things are important. I'm also a long-time yoga practitioner, and I trained as a yoga teacher in 2018. So yoga and meditation are very important parts of my own self-care. These are practices that really help me to feel sort of nourished and replenished.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I would agree. The grind hustle is a real thing, especially when you have your own business, like you said, and you're doing something that you love. You can find yourself working hours amongst hours, and can end up right back in the burnout situation again. So it does become really
Exactly.
important, yeah, to sort of develop those activities and have those resources that help you stay grounded, and people that help you stay grounded as well.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that'll to turn it off when you need to.
Yeah. And actually, I think you raise an important thing there, Lisa, because, women are not very good at asking for help. And, I'm a woman in her 60s. So maybe it's a generational thing as well. And maybe it's an ethnic thing too. I'm a white, privileged woman with an education where one of the main cultural messages has been be independent,
Oh yeah.
do things yourself, that kind of thing. And so it can be very challenging sometimes for women to ask for help. But I think if you're running your own business, then that's a roadblock, a road bump that you need to find a way over.
Yeah.
Yeah, whether it's asking for that support from your family and friends just to nourish you, or whether it's actually bringing in additional paid support in the form of, in my case, other writers or a bookkeeper. Hiring a
Yeah.
bookkeeper was one of the most important things I did for my business back in 2010. We still work together, and the burden that takes from my shoulders is huge. So, finding those kinds of things are really helpful in your overall self-care as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So, yeah, so these are all things that are important. And I thank you for sharing those with us. I'm sure it's going to help a lot of listeners, that tune into this episode. And as we think about wrapping up, is there anything that you would like to leave us in terms of, just dealing with adversity, overcoming obstacles, pushing through, finding that purpose-driven, career, maybe even that some people might be looking for?
Yeah, all good things come in threes, right? I think the first thing is, and we touched on this, is listen to your body. It's always trying to keep you safe. And there are many practices that you can engage in that help you get more in tune with what your body's trying to tell you, and to help you kind of listen more closely to that. So I do think listening to your body is incredibly important, especially as we age. Second, trust yourself. I think there's many factors alive in work culture, professional culture, that kind of conspire to quieten the creativity and the things that make us unique, whether we're working in a corporate environment, whether we're working in healthcare, which of course is increasingly corporatized, right? So I think trusting yourself is very important. I come across again and again, I mainly work with women, but that idea that they've lost a sense of trusting their instincts. So finding ways to reconnect with your instinct, I think, is really important, because that's such a powerful combination of who you are as an individual, your cultural background, your influences, and your professional, those layers of professional expertise that you've built up over years. And then I guess the third thing is honoring rest. There's so many ways to do that. Finding the things that nourish and replenish you, even if they're in bite-sized snacks, can be really helpful to help you keep your show on the road.
Yeah, yeah. Well, all of those things were very insightful. And I must say, the last one that you mentioned, honor rest, is something that I actually came across this morning in my Bible scriptures that I read. So I usually, read the Bible in the morning. And the one prayer actually that was there this morning was to teach me how to honor rest.
Oh,
Um,
that's interesting.
it's
Yeah.
very interesting that you just said it exactly the way I read it this morning. So yeah, so definitely that connection is there today.
Well, I love when universes collide.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So this has been a wonderful interview. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your expertise with us and sharing your story. And I just want to give you the opportunity to tell people how to reach out to you. If you have anything that you'd like to share with us at all, please do.
Oh, thanks, Lisa. I appreciate that. I think the simplest two things. I'm on LinkedIn. And so if you're on LinkedIn, please do connect with me. I love to have conversations with people on LinkedIn. It's just LinkedIn, Alex Howson. And my website is alexhowson.com. And you'll find lots of different resources there that might be of interest. And to you, Lisa, I say thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate the opportunity to have a conversation with you. I'm so glad that we connected through the Health Podcast Network.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's such an amazing community of podcasters and just great people. So looking forward to our continued relationship and looking forward to speaking with you again in the future, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you so much. You too. Take care.
Have you been thinking about transitioning into a non-clinical leadership role? Maybe this line of thinking always ends up with you feeling overwhelmed or confused or even frustrated because you're not sure which path to take. You're not sure which role is right for you. Well, you have to decide. Is it going to be the path of staying on the hamster wheel of decision making? Or are you going to finally take the first step to securing your future with the next best role? Well, I'm here to help you with my 90-day transition plan. To learn more, schedule your career transition breakthrough call at www.schedulewithdrlisa.com. That's www.schedulewithdrlisa.com. Take care.
If you enjoyed podcasts like this, you should check out our other shows on Health Podcast Network. For example, Hopeful Hints, hosted by Dr. Tara, guides and supports those on the often challenging and isolating journey of women's health concerns and infertility. There's a particularly powerful episode that you should check out called All Things Endometriosis, which dives deep into understanding the condition to help the many women who suffer from endometriosis and have no idea they have it, and healthcare providers who are uneducated about it, making the diagnosis process so difficult. Check out Hopeful Hints on your favorite podcast platform or visit healthpodcastnetwork.com.